It started like any other field assignment. The cabin was old but sturdy, nestled so deep in the Appalachian woods that the nearest town was a 2-hour drive away. To me, it was perfect, a haven for observing nocturnal creatures. The area boasted dense forests, hidden streams, and wildlife untouched by human interference. Thanksgiving night was no different. My research journal lay beside a stack of dog-eared field guides, filled with notes on owls, coyotes, and bats. I had spent hours setting up trail cameras and bait traps earlier, and exhaustion weighed on me as I sank into my sleeping bag. The small propane heater hummed softly, its warmth lulling me to sleep. That's when the dream came. I was cocooned in my sleeping bag, but I couldn't move. No matter how hard I tried, my limbs wouldn't respond. The cabin around me seemed darker, the shadows deeper. Then, from those shadows, hands emerged, long, skeletal, and gray, their fingers impossibly thin and twitching as they reached for me. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. Just as the hands brushed my face, I bolted upright, gasping for air. For a moment, I sat there, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. Then I heard it, a faint tapping at the window. At first, I thought it was a branch swaying in the wind, but the tapping was rhythmic, deliberate. Grabbing my flashlight, I aimed it at the window. That's when I saw her. A woman stood outside, barely illuminated by the beam. Her hair was a wild tangle, her clothes torn and muddy. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. She pressed her palms against the glass and mouthed something. I hesitated before cracking the window just enough to hear her. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I need food." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "Lost." She didn't answer, just stared at me with those sunken eyes. Against my better judgment, I closed the window, locked the door, and prepared her a plate of the canned beans and jerky I had for dinner. When I opened the door to hand it to her, she shook her head. "I can't eat out here," she murmured. "Let me in." The unease in my chest deepened. There was something wrong, something unnatural about her presence. "I'm sorry," I said firmly. "I can't do that." Her expression twisted, lips trembling as if she were about to cry. But no tears came. Without another word, she turned and walked into the darkness. The forest seemed to swallow her whole. I stood there for a long moment, my breath fogging in the cold night air. Then the sobbing began. It was faint at first, blending with the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. But it grew louder, more anguished, until it sounded like it was coming from all around the cabin. I bolted the door and drew the curtains, but the sound persisted, threading its way into my thoughts. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I drifted into a restless sleep. Morning brought an eerie stillness. The sobbing was gone, replaced by the usual sounds of birds chirping and squirrels scampering through the underbrush. I told myself the woman was just a drifter, someone in desperate need of help. But as I stepped outside, my rationalizations faltered. Footprints, bare and human, circled the cabin in erratic loops. But they weren't alone. Interspersed with them were claw marks, deep and jagged, gouged into the dirt as if something crawled alongside her. My heart sank as I inspected the windows. Every pane bore the same marks, scratches etched in frenzied, overlapping patterns. I wanted to leave, to pack my equipment and abandon the research trip, but curiosity, stubborn and foolish, kept me there. After all, I told myself I wasn't in any real danger. Was I? That afternoon, I drove into town, hoping to clear my head and stock up on supplies. While chatting with a store clerk, an older man overheard me mention the strange woman. His face darkened, and he motioned for me to step aside. "You shouldn't be out there alone," he said in a low voice. "Not this time of year." "Why?" I asked, more intrigued than alarmed. He hesitated, then said, "There's a legend around here about the hollow folk. They're spirits, or maybe demons, I don't know, but they wander the woods during storms and holidays, looking for the lonely. They knock on doors, beg for food, ask to be let in. If you say no, they'll try to take you anyway." His words sent a chill down my spine. "And if you say yes, they'll take something worse." That night, I couldn't focus on my research. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the trees outside set my nerves on edge. I kept the lights off, hoping to avoid drawing attention, but the oppressive darkness seemed to press in from all sides. Then, just as I began to relax, there was a knock at the door. It was soft, almost polite, but in the dead silence of the forest, it sounded like thunder. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, I moved to the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Summoning every ounce of courage, I opened the door a crack and shone my flashlight into the night. The beam caught the woman's face, mere inches from the door. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "Let me in," she said, her voice no longer pleading but commanding. I slammed the door and locked it, heart racing. From outside, I heard scratching, like nails dragging across wood. The door rattled on its hinges, and her voice turned guttural and human. "Let me in." Desperation took over. I grabbed the trail cameras I had set up earlier, rewiring them to act as makeshift traps, and scattered them near the windows and doors. Then I waited, gripping a hunting knife with trembling hands. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Dawn broke, and I found myself still alive, though I couldn't say the same for my sanity. The cameras had captured nothing but static. Outside, the claw marks had deepened, the ground torn as if by an animal. I packed my things and left that morning, leaving behind the cabin and my research. Weeks later, back in the safety of civilization, I scoured local archives for information about the Hollow Folk. The stories varied, but one detail remained consistent. They only came for those who were alone. I haven't ventured into the woods since, but sometimes in the dead of night, I hear faint tapping at my window. Returning to my hometown for Thanksgiving wasn't something I planned on, but after years of estrangement, my family guilt me into a visit. Instead of staying at my childhood home, I booked a small Airbnb. It was cheap and convenient, though I didn't realize until I arrived that the house used to be an orphanage. The weathered building sat on a hill, its peeling paint and cracked windows giving an ominous, forgotten air. I shrugged it off. My childhood fears were far behind me. Or so I thought. The first evening passed uneventfully. After a simple dinner, I curled up in the living room, sipping tea while scrolling through my phone. Shadows danced on the walls as the wind whistled through the old pipes. Nostalgia crept in, and I thought of the games I used to play in this very neighborhood with Adam. He had been a scrawny boy with wild hair and the brightest blue eyes. But Adam disappeared when I was 8. One day he was there, the next gone. No one in town ever talked about it, and eventually I stopped asking. As I climbed into bed, the heavy silence of the orphanage wrapped around me. Sleep came uneasily, my dreams peppered with strange melodies that sounded like lullabies. At first, I thought they were just remnants of the dream. Then I woke. The lullaby persisted, soft and haunting. It floated through the air like a distant echo. I sat up, my heart pounding. The room was dimly lit by the glow of my phone charging on the nightstand. Grabbing it, I checked the time, 3:12 a.m., and saw an unread text. "Do you remember me, Clara?" A shiver ran down my spine. The sender was unknown, and my phone number wasn't something I freely handed out. I stared at the screen, dread curling in my stomach. Was this someone's idea of a joke? The lullaby faded, leaving the room in oppressive silence. I felt eyes on me, though the room appeared empty. The shadows seemed deeper somehow, as if they were shifting. Trying to brush off the unease, I lay back down and pulled the covers over my head, like a child hiding from the boogeyman. I didn't sleep. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the old curtains, but it did little to chase away the lingering dread. The text remained on my phone, taunting me. I couldn't shake the memory of Adam's disappearance. The orphanage had always been a source of local rumors. Ghost stories, missing children, and faint crying heard at night. But those were tales meant to scare kids into behaving, right? Determined to ground myself in reality, I visited the local library. The building smelled of dust and forgotten books, and the librarian, a gray-haired woman with a kind smile, welcomed me with a nod. Do you have town records from the early 2000s? I asked, trying to sound casual. The librarian directed me to the archives, where I spent hours combing through newspapers and files. At last, I found an article from 2003. Tragedy at Sunset Orphanage. 10-year-old found dead. My stomach flipped as I read the familiar name. Adam. He'd been found in the orphanage basement, his small body curled under a rusted staircase. The coroner's report cited blunt force trauma to the head. Foul play was suspected, but no one was ever charged. The orphanage closed a year later. Its remaining residents relocated. Memories of Adam's laughter and the way he'd always picked the dandelions from my backyard rushed back. Guilt bubbled up. Why had I stopped asking about him? I couldn't stay in the Airbnb another night. Returning to my car, I called the host to explain I'd be leaving early. They didn't answer, so I texted instead, hoping for a refund. As I packed, the unease in the house grew palpable. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and faint whispers tickled my ears. I told myself it was just my imagination, heightened by the chilling discovery. Then night fell. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, my suitcase by the door. I had intended to leave hours earlier, but every time I worked up the courage, something stopped me. The house itself seemed alive, as though it were holding me in place. The lullaby started again. I froze. The tune was soft and sweet, but its melody carried an undercurrent of despair. The text alert on my phone dinged, and I hesitated before looking. You left me? A cold sweat broke out on my skin. The shadows in the room grew darker, heavier, and I found myself paralyzed. My limbs wouldn't move, no matter how desperately I willed them to. That's when I felt it. The mattress dipped slightly, as though something had crawled onto the bed. A faint rustling noise filled the air, followed by the sensation of small hands gripping my ankles. My breath hitched as the weight shifted closer. A childlike figure emerged from beneath the bed, its face obscured by shadow. Its voice was a whisper, but it echoed in my mind. You left me, Clara. Tears streamed down my face as I recognized him. Adam, or what was left of him. His eyes were milky white, his face gaunt and bruised. He reached for me, his small hand brushing my cheek. I didn't mean to. I croaked, though I wasn't sure he could hear me. The weight on my chest lifted as Adam's figure retreated back into the shadows, leaving the room eerily still. By morning, I was gone. I drove out of town without looking back, the orphanage shrinking in my rear-view mirror. But no matter how far I went, the feeling of being followed never left me. A week later, back in my apartment, I received another text. See you next Thanksgiving. I dropped my phone, my heart hammering in my chest. Adam wasn't done with me. And deep down, I knew I'd have to go back.